you don't think about leadership in a way where you only see titles. It's not about titles. It's not about you. It's about other people. So that was the best way that I could really sum that up is it teaches you how to be that servant leader. Not just from a personal and leadership standpoint or in your funeral homes, but also in your communities. And then if you wanted to serve on different organizations such as NFDA, it taught you how to be a good steward for your board members, for your association. So it taught me so much. I wouldn't trade that program for the world.
This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end-of-life tasks.
Today, we're joined by Allyse Worland, a licensed funeral director and embalmer in Indiana and Kentucky. She's also a dedicated advocate for the future of funeral service, which is pretty neat. She's a first-generation funeral professional with over 15 years of experience, and she is one of the most highly respected voices in her field, regularly works with NFDA, which is the National Funeral Director Association, speaking at their national events. And most importantly, she inspires the next generation of up-and-coming funeral industry professionals through mentorship and education. Allyse, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Adam, thank you so much. That was an amazing introduction. It definitely humbles me to think that I have been in this for half of my life now, and to have such kind words said about me. So thank you. You're awesome. I'm excited to be on here with you.
It's going to be fun. And that's one of the things that I'd love to start with, actually. You said that half of your life you've been doing this. You're not that old. You
No,
started very, very early. Can you
I
talk
did.
about starting that journey at a young age?
Yes. So I guess I'll begin from the very beginning. Not to bore you with my upbringing, but I'm from a really small cornfield town in Indiana. So very small. The only thing that happens back home is seriously the Friday night football games. That's the only thing that's there is cornfields, and we've got our high school. That's pretty much it. So when I was very young, I was actually 9 years old when I decided to be a funeral director. And a lot of the younger funeral directors that are first generation, they have kind of the similar story as I do. Had a bad experience with a loved one, how they looked in the casket. He unfortunately was a victim of, he died by suicide. My relative did. That was my first experience with the death of despair. And so he did not look great. And my family was absolutely distraught. And I was a big bookworm. I still am. And I went to my library and I found a book on ancient Egyptians. And it said sometimes these embalmers are now called in modern times funeral directors or morticians. And as soon as I saw that, like, that's exactly what I'm going to be. So I decided to become a funeral director at a very young age. And then at 15 years old, I knocked on a few doors to a few funeral homes back home. And I had about four doors shut in my face before one of them opened. And that was my first mentor. So I get my love of mentorship and love of sharing my knowledge because of her. I'd certainly credit her to that. But yeah, since I was 15 years old, I've been working in a funeral home, and it's been amazing. And yes, this is half my life. So if you do the math, you can figure out how old I am. So yeah, half of my life this year has been dedicated to funeral service. And I, even if I knew back then, and this is the truth, Adam, the absolute truth, even if I knew back then what I know now, I would totally do the same. Like no regrets at all.
So hold on. So you're 15 years old. You go to the
Yes.
library. Are you specifically looking for this type of book and you found it, or were you just, hey, I need to clear my head and it called to you?
Yeah, so honestly, I loved history. I was always kind of fascinated with ancient Egyptians and also Greek, Roman. I love those sorts of literature, the stories. So honestly, I had just found this book and I'm like, I am just so curious about what they did back then. And really, it just ran down this rabbit hole, and I that's how I found it. Talked about ancient Egyptians, the embalmers, how respected they were. They lived in their own little city. I mean, it was really, really cool. So I was so passionate about it, even at such a young age.
So this is something I'm kind of confused about. You said
Yeah.
you grew up in Indiana. There's
Yep.
corn around you, ten corn, sweet corn, popcorn, waxy corn, all the different
That's
corns
right.
that,
It's
that are,
everywhere.
right? Yeah, it's everywhere. It's not a massive town, but you said you went to three, four, maybe even five funeral homes.
Yep.
That's a dichotomy for me. So if you have a really small community, why were there so many funeral homes in the area?
Yeah, there's literally a funeral home across the street from the one that I worked at, and that was considered to be the Catholic funeral home, and then we had the Protestant funeral home. And then a little
Hmm.
further out into the county, you had another funeral home, and then a little bit further out towards another county, you had another funeral home. So, why there's so many, I can't tell you, because I mean, I know I can tell you people back home don't like to leave, don't like to go very far for certain things. But yeah,
Hmm.
there was, back then several funeral homes, and 3 of the 4 are still in business to
So
this day.
I'm picturing small town. You're 15. You don't have your license yet. Does your mom and dad, your family know that you're doing this, or are you literally like, "Hey, I'm taking my bike and I'm going to knock on some doors by myself"?
Yep,
And
so I
no.
walked to, 2 of the 4, and I bummed a ride from a friend that could drive for the other 2. No, I wasn't very upfront with my parents. I, was always a free spirit, let's say, so my parents didn't always know what I was getting into, but I, definitely had a dream and a vision, and I was gonna make that happen no matter what. So that's, thankfully, the funeral home I got a job at was within walking distance of school, so I would just walk there after high school.
All right, so you knock on some doors.
Yes.
What's the pitch? "Hi, I'm Allyse. My dad died or my relative died. I wanna work here,"
Yeah,
and
pretty
they
much. I
respond.
mean, yeah, pretty much. So basically my pitch was my name is Elise and I'm a local high school kid and I would really love to come in, maybe job shadow you, just whatever you need help with. I really would like to go to mortuary school after high school, so I want to learn if this is really the path I want to take. And that was really my pitch. I dressed very nice, like I wasn't just showing up
Mhm.
in, my skinny jeans and my band t-shirts, I wore to school. My Chuck Taylors. But,
Yep.
no, I actually, I dressed up and, I thought I looked, presentable. And, yeah, like I said, if 3 of the 4 shut their doors and they're like, "We don't want you." And interestingly enough, my first mentor was also the very first female funeral director in my hometown, and she was the one who said yes to me. So
Amazing.
she was absolutely phenomenal. And to this day, we still, keep in touch. And, I still every chance I get, every seminar I teach and she happens to be there, I'm like, "That woman right there is the reason for this passion right here." And they all kinda look at her and they're like, "Oh, it's your fault." So yeah, I mean, that's what I like to instill in others too. So, like that fire that, you love this profession, you have to pass that on. You've gotta pass that torch.
So she seriously changed your life. Now,
She did.
you knock on the door, she says, "Yes, I want you to come." Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what it was like to start so young? How did it shape your approach today? What were you actually working on? Did you have to work your way up? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there really wasn't any working up. Not really. There really wasn't any working up at all. I was proofreading obituaries. It was cleaning a lot of cleaning whatever they would throw at me. A lot of looking over her shoulder, watching her do makeup, and just being fascinated with how much of an art form it was. So she really taught me a lot about the art form. She also taught
mhm.
me about how the fact that this is a production. So she would say, this is the most important person. So she was talking about the casket, the person in the casket, the person in the urn. But back then we didn't hardly cremate at all back then, which that's a whole nother tangent. But she said, this is the most important person here. And imagine this is your favorite day of your life. This is the most important day of your life, and your hair looks bad, your makeup looks bad, like, the whole thing is ruined if you look bad, and I loved that, and she really was able to teach me how this was an art. So I watched her a lot, I proofread a lot of obits, I laminated a lot of bookmarks, just little things around the funeral home, watered lots of flowers. I did all of it from the ground up and scrubbed a lot of toilets, which I still do anyway. But nothing was beneath me. Nothing was off the table for me to do. And just watching her interact with the families and how she connected with them, and she made them feel like her family. And of course, back home, we know everybody anyway, but they would come back not because of the owner, but because of her. Because of her passion and her sympathy and how she made them feel like she was there to take care of them. And that's exactly how I direct as well. I see her and I hear her when I talk. Sometimes I hear her in my voice, and it's like, yep, that's her. That's what she taught me.
Channeling your past. I love it. Now, what are some of the things that surprised you?
Honestly, I think some of the things that surprise me is, how competitive some of, our colleagues can be. So again, full disclosure, I always look at every funeral director as my colleague and never my competition. that's always been I even instill that with the students, the mentees that I have now. You never competition, you're always a colleague. If you run out of fluid and you need some embalming fluid and you are like, hey, I really need, if you knock on my door, I'm going to give that to you and I don't expect to get it back. We're all serving the same community. So that was a kind of eye-opening, was just how competitive our colleagues can be. Not everybody has that same mindset, but I do, and I would always help my funeral service family. So definitely a eye-opening experience.
Today, or more recently rather, I've had several conversations with funeral directors, and one of the things that they oftentimes say is that the up-and-coming generation is hard to get into the office, they're hard to find, they're not too reliable. It's a staffing issue. Is that something that you're finding as well? And what can we do to fix that if that is an issue?
Yeah, so really there's a few different things that can be done. I don't think there's just one right answer for that. So something that I spoke of last year when I presented in Las Vegas, presented with another presenter at the National Funeral Directors Association Expo. We presented on mending the generational divide, and we talked about how there's not just one thing. So recognizing that success looks different for each generation is super important. So the generations that are younger, like mine, I mean, I'm a young millennial, like Gen Z. They don't necessarily, or they don't want to live to work. They want to work to live. So they don't
Mhm.
necessarily want to do that. They want to have the work life balance as well. So what does that look like to them? What does a work life balance look like to a baby boomer? What does a work life balance look for Gen X? If you go across the board, it all looks different. I'm a little bit of a odd case because I love working 13, 14 hours a day. Like, all right, let's get 6 more. Like, I'm ready to go. That's me, but I'm weird. I'm an anomaly. But I also understand that not everyone is like me. There are people out there that are funeral directors out there that have children, they have families, and they wanna be a part of that. Maybe they saw their associate, their boss, their mother, whoever, not be there for them or their families, and they're like, "That just doesn't wanna I don't want that to be me." So I don't know if it's actually I think it's a generational lens where you're seen as unreliable, but it's not that you're unreliable. Like, say you had to take your kid to practice or something, that doesn't necessarily make you unreliable. Say you had a family emergency, like, okay, well, you're gonna take care of that rather than stay here and work the funeral home. So,
Mhm.
I think that's a different lens, and I don't think there's one right answer because I think there's also a reputation. So as soon as you see a young person, you're just like, "Oh, you just wanna be on social media and you're on your phone all day and you're not gonna show up to work on time." So what is the right answer? There's not just one, is truly what that's about.
Are you noticing that Gen Z is approaching death care and the funeral service differently than the elder, millennials and the people that have been in the industry for 30, 40, 50 years?
Yes, definitely. So, especially with the fact that we are so connected technology wise. So, they're definitely seeing that. Do I really need to go into the funeral home and sit there and wait for the phone to ring?
Mhm.
Technically, we have a answering service. Technically, we have everything is online now. So if a family calls in, wants to put an obit on the website, I can do that from right here. I am also You have 24-hour access to me because of my cell phone. I mean, I'm seeing that argument is, why do I have to sit here and why do I have to wait for the phone to ring when I can be doing something for myself, for self-care, or for my
Mhm.
communities? Because honestly, that's something else that's overlooked, is getting people out into the communities and doing the work, because people want to work with people they work with, wouldn't you say? And
Yeah.
making those connections, I'm not doing that sitting here waiting for the phone to ring. So that's something I'm definitely seeing.
Hmm. Do you think that they are demanding, if they're pushing, are there ideas that they're coming with that break the traditional mold of what a funeral home offers? So I think that definitely plays into the
Yes.
remote work. But what are they changing that you think could be for the better, or what do you think might be for the worse?
Yeah, so I think for the better, definitely changing the fact that we have to just sit there and not go out into the communities. We have to sit there until 5 o'clock. That's something definitely I'm seeing that's a huge thing. Why do we have to sit here, wait for the phone to ring? If we have access, you have access to us, we can always come back. So I'm definitely seeing the scheduling, because it used to be, this to me, it's a lifestyle. And I mean, I don't have a problem sitting there. But yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, as I talked to some of the younger directors, honestly, they help me to understand more of, hey, we could be using our time more wisely. So I've learned a lot from the newer funeral directors, actually. And as far as wanting to offer more, they're wanting to offer things as far as more innovation with the profession, as far as like technology. Like, let's innovate, let's get some technology in here. We don't necessarily have to do it the way we've always done it. That's a bit of a push. Getting more involved with the community, having more involvement within the funeral home, offering things like hey, like, let's do something inside the funeral home, whether that's a service of remembrance, whether that's allowing it to be, well, today's election day. Here's an example, allowing it to be like a voting poll, getting the community actually inside your funeral home instead of keeping them out. That's helpful too. Getting people involved in coming into your facility. Anytime you can have someone come into your facility, check it out, talk to you. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a great thing. So I love
Let,
that those things are happening too.
let's talk about that in detail. So innovation for a lot of people just means progress. It's an
Yes.
evolution. There's disruptive progress, there's incremental progress. What type of innovation do you want to see happen in the industry? And not just ours, but is it education? Is it preparedness? Is it embalming? Is it the makeup? Like what is different? What are you seeing in the world that a lot of people just quite frankly they're not going to be familiar with because they don't have your perspective, your lens, and your experience?
Yeah, so definitely evolving to what the families want, the consumer wants,
Mhm.
because a lot of the older generation, and believe me, my a lot of my mentors are certainly from the older generation. So I've seen them bring a lot to the table. But as far as recognizing what is gonna be the future of the profession, what the actual families want, that's what we need to be looking at, because the good old days are not gonna be coming back. Like, back again 15 years ago, again, this is 15 years ago in my small town,
Mhm.
we did have 2 days of visitation, and then we had the service on the 3rd day. I don't hardly see that. I mean, I haven't seen that. Maybe I've done it once in the past, I wanna say 5 years, but that's just not gonna be the case. So now we have
What
to
happens
adapt.
now?
So now I'm seeing a lot, in at least in my area, here in Indianapolis, I'm seeing a lot of the all-in-one-day services. So it's visitation for a few hours and then service the next. So that's, it's convenient, it's quick, and people can get back to work. So they're concerned about their time off, and it's almost seen as this is a kind of an obligation. This is kind of a inconvenience sometimes to my life that a death has occurred. And, bringing that back around to actually say, "Hey, this is like an acknowledgement of a life that was lived and a death that occurred." That's certainly gonna be coming back around. I think that the younger generations are really spearheading that, trying to get that out there with the education, to your point, the educating, your community on what is the value of a funeral? Why do we even do this? Why is this still even a thing? So why are we not educating? So that's something else I've noticed is our generation is a lot more willing to educate others, and not just we don't have to be behind the scenes anymore.
Mhm. And I think that that's something that isn't only impacting the funeral industry, the funeral professionals that are in the industry. Yesterday, we had a podcast recording with a doctor who started a website and an Instagram. He's tremendously popular, 35,000 plus followers on Instagram
Nice.
alone, called How to Train Your Doctor. And he focuses on palliative care. And it's interesting to me to hear that individuals that are professionals in the funeral industry are saying we need to educate the public, educate our customers, educate our consumers. How do you do that though? Typically, people aren't thinking about, oh, I should be pre planning. Some people do, but it's not always easy to get to the people. How do you do that?
No, certainly not. So, and it doesn't even have to be in a formal setting. So, I think a lot of people think it has to be some sort of lunch and learn or some seminar or some death cafe. I really don't think that that's the case. So, again, it goes back to being out in your community. So, what are you doing out in your
Hmm.
community to just start the conversation? I mean, even if you're sitting at a bar having a drink, I'm a talker. If you haven't noticed by now, and I'll sit next to anybody, like a stranger at a bar, and I will just like I will talk. And, obviously the question comes up, "What do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm a funeral director." And so then that segues that conversation, and that just that one person I have that conversation with, just a candid conversation. It wasn't scary. I don't look like Lurch, I'm a real person. And then you segue that into hey, this is why I do this. This is why this isn't creepy. It's not something that is morbid. And then that person goes to the next person and talks about what a great experience they had with this crazy funeral director in a bar. And then it just kind of snowballs. And so that's really the message. I mean, just going out in your community and talking to people, having a candid conversation. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. I mean, you could certainly do that. Absolutely. You could host a death cafe or a lunch and learn in your funeral home. Absolutely. I mean, every one of us seems to do that for prearrangement, but the conversation needs to continue every single day. You need to be singing the song of this great profession if we want it to live on.
What are some of the crazy questions you've gotten?
I've had one of my favorite crazy questions that I got was, do you really drain the blood from the toe? Someone said to me, I said, well, can you explain to me what that means? And he said, oh, I heard that you just hang them on a meat hook and you cut the big toe off and then you just drain the blood that way. And I said, no, that's not it. That's not it at all. That was one of my
So
favorite crazy questions of all time.
that's amazing. So many just
Oh,
misconceptions out there,
so many
quite frankly, probably because
misconceptions.
people don't know. Yeah.
They have no idea, they have no idea, and that's why it's so important to educate is because they don't have a clue. Maybe they saw something on a movie, maybe they'll saw something on YouTube or on TikTok, and, that's just not the case. That's not it.
For people that are trying to get into the industry and dispel those misconceptions that are curious about it, can you help listeners understand what the different roles are in a funeral home and maybe break it down by size? Because in some funeral homes, it really is just one or two people. In others, it's a much larger staff. So, what should people be considering there? And then the second question I'll ask you after that is, how do you get into the industry? Do you need to go to school? Do you need to get training? Like, what does that process look like?
Okay, let's go. This is one of my favorite questions. So I've
Yeah.
worked both. I've worked both. So again, I started at a very small firm. We did back 15 years ago. I think we did about 150, between 130 and 150, and it's still the same size today. Okay, there were a few funeral directors. There was, of course, the owner, and then we had three licensed. We had an intern. We had three license. We had two other licensed funeral directors. Now you were doing everything. So I mean everything. You were going on the transfers, so those removals, those house calls in the middle of the night. You were getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You were the one doing the embalming. You were done one doing the dressing, casketing, cosmetizing. You were the one making arrangements, going on the services. You were ordering everything from the vault, the casket. All of this is your responsibility. So it is truly a lifestyle. And, you didn't know if you were going to have an off day. You were also expected to sit in that chair until 5 o'clock or later and listen for the phone to ring. So that was my small town experience. That was my hometown experience. And you were also expected to be out in the community. It was a expectation that you were out in the community because you want to be seen. You want to make sure that you've got a good relationship with your community, and then it really that's really how it was back home. You did everything. It was a lifestyle. It was very difficult to even leave the county because it's like, what if I get a call? So it was like that paranoia in the back of my mind was I can't even leave this county because what if I have a house call? So it's truly a lifestyle. It's very difficult to get away if you are in a small town. But if you've got a good team, you have another funeral director, a counterpart, then you can kind of go back and forth and sharing responsibilities. Now in the bigger city, now I've worked for a much larger firms that have done 3,000 plus calls. So I've also
Hmm.
done that as well. And if you're looking really for that kind of more 9 to 5 schedule, I mean, that's definitely where it's at because they only do like certain departments do certain things. So like for example, the funeral directors at the firm that I worked for only do arrangements and take funerals. They don't actually go on the transfers anymore, go to the embalming room. They don't embalm at all anymore. So it's in departments and your hours are 9 to 5. You might take call like twice a month. You don't ever have to go out. You're just basically answering questions. So if you want more of a schedule, definitely you're going to have to find that in a bigger city. You're going to have to find a much larger firm. But if you want the full array, the full experience of being a funeral director, then you're going to need to go to a much smaller firm. And that's really my best analogy for that. That's really my best advice on how to explain that because I've done it.
Is there a transfer where somebody like yourself will start small and then go big, or is it more likely that somebody in a big shop will specialize and then say, "No, I want a broader experience," or
So
is
I've done
it
it both.
unique?
Yeah. So I've done it both ways. And I got to, in my personal opinion, I loved and I missed doing everything. So when I was working at the big firm, I really missed doing everything, and I'm like, this is great and all, but this just isn't for me because I really want to do everything. I miss going on transfers. I miss being in the back. I miss the art of it. I don't just want to be up front. I want to be in the back with the loved ones as well. And it's so rewarding. The biggest reward of being a full service funeral director, I mean, full gamut,
Hmm.
is the fact that I get to be with that family, that person from the time that they take their last breath. Hospital calls me. I'm the one there going for the removal, and I'm going to be the one that's there picking the loved one up. The family remembers me from the next morning when I meet with them. They also understand that I was the embalmer. I was there for them. And then when they go see that loved one, they're like, Allyse, you did an amazing job. And you know what? That makes it worth it for me. And I'm the one at the graveside, and they're like, man, we just could not have done it without you. And that's the best thing to hear as a funeral director. Like, you couldn't have done it without me. Oh my gosh. So like that helps me so much to keep going. And there's been some tough times in this profession that I've gone through, and that makes it all worth it. And just to have the full circle, to be there for the entire process, made it so much worth it to me.
You're 15 years old. You're knocking on the door. Your mentor
Yes.
says, yes, come on in. How soon until you started to get to work one on one, even with her on customers? Are you allowed to work before you have a special type of certification or degree, or can you really just hop right in?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the firm and how much they're allowing you to do. Also, there's considerations like, hey, absolutely, like there's certain rules. I mean, obviously, absolutely no cell phones in here. Absolutely, like you cannot like talk about any of this that you see. We have to be reverent and respectful. So I remember that
Okay.
she was very upfront, like, hey, this is a sacred place. She would always tell me, and I still will echo this to this day, this prep room is the most sacred place in this building. This is the closest to heaven right here that we have because they're already there, is what she would tell me. That's exactly what she told me, and I can't believe I remember that even 15 years later. But and that really put it into perspective, not to ever violate
Mhm.
that sanctity of that room is really what it was. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the funeral home, how much they'll let you do as, kind of an outsider. If you're, especially since if you're not going to mortuary school, that's going to be very difficult for you to see a lot of the stuff. But again, when you go to mortuary school, it gets a little, you have take that step to be a little more serious, which allows me to answer your second question. What does it
Yeah.
take to become a funeral director? How to get into this profession? So I would really recommend going and doing what I did and just knocking on some doors and see if they want any help. The other thing is I don't want someone to do is to get in this profession because just of morbid curiosity. That's not going to sustain you long term. So if you go to that funeral home, that local funeral home, I mean, as soon as you can, just check out and see what it's all about. Kind of job shadowing. That's really what I did at first. And then when you're like, I've fallen in love with this profession and this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and then you can take that step, and then you do have to go to mortuary school in most cases. In most states, you do have to enroll in a mortuary school, a mortuary college, and they have an associate's program. Some states do have they require bachelor's. I think Ohio is one of those. Then you would proceed to do an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship times are after taking place after the college, after you have your degree, and that varies, from a year to 3 years. I think is the most I know. And then after that, you take your state test, and then you become licensed. So it's a lot of time. It's a lot of money, it is a lot of stress. It's a lot to become what I am. It really is. It's not just anybody off the street.
Where are the schools located? Are there several across the country? How
Yes.
long does the degree typically take? Is it a 2 year? Is it a 4 year? Is it even longer?
Yeah, so it is there are several across the country. I believe there are actually 3 mortuary schools. They're also like just regular colleges that happen to offer the mortuary school program, but they're all across the country, and generally they take anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years for your associates. And then of course if you go on for your bachelor's, it could be 3.5 to 4 years, just depending on which school you go to. It also depends on if you go online. I think it takes longer to graduate if you're going online versus if you actually go. And again, 10 years ago when I was in school, when I was in mortuary school, we didn't have such a thing as online mortuary school. We
Mhm.
didn't have the option. So I actually sat in class like a regular college, and I learned that way. So now it's kind of funny to me because every mortuary school student I talk to, they all go online.
Yeah. All right. I think that one of the narratives that resonates throughout the entire conversations that we've had is that you want to give back, that you're collaborative, mentorship is important.
Yes.
You need to have a passion for the industry. And that likely led you, I imagine, to become part of the NFDA's Emerging Leaders Program. Yeah.
Yes, it did.
How has that influenced your career? What advice would you give to someone applying for these kinds of programs? And for those that don't know, what is NFDA's Emerging Leaders Program as well?
Yeah, so the Emerging Leaders Program is a program that is led by the NFDA, and it talks all about the different qualities of a leader and how to step into that role. So, really, my whole goal in applying when I did was to learn more about what it really meant to be a servant leader. And that is the best program to go into if you're really looking for an opportunity to learn about servant leadership, what it takes to be a servant leader, because it is not easy. You really, just to put it, how it was for me, I learned so much. It was such a transformative sign. It was a transformative time in my life to where I'm like, this is a huge responsibility. You don't think about leadership in a way where you sometimes you only see titles. It's not about titles. It's not about you. It's about other people. So that was the best way that I could really sum that up is it teaches you how to be that servant leader. Not just from a personal and a leadership standpoint or in your funeral homes, but also in your communities. And then if you wanted to serve on different organizations such as NFDA, it taught you how to be a good steward for your board members, for your associations. So it taught me so much. I wouldn't trade that program for the world. It was really amazing, and I made some lifelong connections. I love that too because it's all about the funeral service family. So it helped me. It helped me so much. It really did.
As a result of that, the programs that you've done, the organizations, the committees, you're all over, which is
I
phenomenal
am.
and quite impressive. What's one question that you wish people asked you more?
One question I wish that they would ask me more.
Yeah.
Why do you love doing this? Because I usually get the question of how did you get into this? Like, is your
Mhm.
family in this? Like, what kind of crazy thing happened to you? I wish people would ask me, why do you love doing this? Because then I can just smile and like I'm truly in love with this profession. Like if you've ever been in love before, it's like this all encapsulating feeling. You just are warm and happy, and like the world just looks brighter when you have that, when you love something or someone. And funeral service does that for me. And as soon as you ask me that, I will light
Yeah.
up because I love this profession so much. It is the love of my life, this profession is.
You can tell. All right. Allyse, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience with
Yes.
us. If people want to learn more, if they want to get in touch, how do they do that?
Yeah, I have no social media. I guess I have a LinkedIn now. So I was forced to get a LinkedIn so you can follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I do have a website, and that's have licensewill That's my side business. But LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I go around teaching other funeral directors seminars. So like I present seminars all over the states of Indiana, Kentucky, and then I also do others across the country. And I do that. And then the second business that I help out with is called Continuing Vision. And same thing, providing quality continuing education to the funeral profession. So yeah, love teaching, love sharing the knowledge.
All right. Allyse, thank you so much for sharing your
Thank
teaching,
you,
sharing your
Adam.
insights and experiences. This is great. We'll put all the links that you mentioned in the show notes. And for those listening, consider joining the funeral profession. It's pretty neat.
Yes, it's the best. It is so rewarding. It is so worth it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at 𝙀𝙙𝙙-𝙀𝙤𝙙-𝙀-𝙀-𝙀-10 at 𝙀𝙀𝙙-𝙀𝙀.com.